The leather spine of the first edition, Hemingway cracked softly as I reshelved it, the sound echoing through the empty Metropolitan Archives like a whisper of judgment. My fingers lingered on the worn cover longer than necessary, a habit born from years of finding comfort in stories that belonged to other people, other lives far more interesting than mine. The musty scent of old paper and preservation chemicals clung to my cardigan, a smell I'd grown to associate with safety, with invisibility. "Jade, you're still here?" Marcus, the night security guard, poked his head around the corner of the rare book section. His salt and pepper beard caught the amber glow of the reading lamps, making him look older than his 53 years. "It's past 8. Even the books need to sleep sometimes." I managed a small smile, tucking a strand of mousy brown hair behind my ear. The gesture was automatic, practiced, designed to make me even smaller, even less noticeable. "Just finishing the Fleming collection. Someone returned 3 volumes out of order, and you know how Mrs. Patterson gets about the cataloging system." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "That woman could give drill sergeants lessons in discipline. But seriously, kid, it's Friday night. Shouldn't you be out with friends, living a little?" The suggestion sent an uncomfortable flutter through my stomach. Friends. I had colleagues who smiled politely when we passed in the hallways, acquaintances who remembered my name at the coffee shop downstairs. But friends. Real friends who called just to talk, who invited you to things, who dragged you places you didn't want to go. "I'm fine here," I said, turning back to the shelf to hide the flush creeping up my neck. "Besides, I have plans tomorrow." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had plans to reorganize my apartment's bookshelves, to finally finish that historical romance I'd been reading in fragments for the past month, to maybe, if I felt particularly brave, walk past the building where he might be, where he always was on Saturday afternoons, according to the patterns I'd observed over 3 years of careful, shameful watching. But Marcus was already retreating, his footsteps fading into the labyrinth of stacks, leaving me alone with the weight of my own pathetic routine. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen lighting up to reveal a message from my college roommate, the closest thing I had to a friend. "Riley, birthday girl, we're picking you up at 10. No excuses. Dress code, something that doesn't scream librarian." My thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out another polite refusal, another excuse about early mornings or headaches or the fictional sick aunt I'd invented sophomore year. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the date glowing at the top of the screen, a stark reminder that I was turning 24 in less than 4 hours. Maybe it was the way Marcus had looked at me, with that mixture of pity and concern that made me feel like a specimen under glass. Or maybe it was the memory that always lurked at the edges of my consciousness, waiting for quiet moments like this to surface. 3 years ago, in a subway station that smelled of urine and desperation, when rough hands had grabbed my purse and I'd been too frozen to even scream. The sound of footsteps, quick and purposeful. The blur of a man in an expensive suit moving with the fluid grace of a predator. The crack of bone meeting bone. The thief crumpling to the ground. My purse returned to my shaking hands. And him. Dominic Valenti. I hadn't known his name then. Not until I'd seen his face weeks later in a newspaper article about a new nightclub opening in Tribeca. But I'd known other things. The exact shade of his eyes, darker than espresso but somehow warmer. The small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, barely visible unless you were close enough to count his breaths. The way he'd looked at me for exactly 3 seconds, his gaze assessing, cataloging, dismissing, before he'd walked away without a word. He hadn't recognized me. Why would he? I was nobody. Nothing. Just another helpless woman in a city full of them. He'd probably saved a dozen people that week alone. Forgotten them all by breakfast the next day. But I hadn't forgotten him. Me. What kind of something? Riley's response was immediate, as if she'd been waiting for any sign of weakness. "Riley, The kind that makes strange men buy you drinks. I'm thinking the red dress we bought you for graduation that you've never worn. 10 p.m. sharp. And Jade? This is happening whether you like it or not. Sophia and I already have a key to your apartment, remember? I did remember. I'd given it to them freshman year during a flu scare, and they'd never returned it. A fact that had seemed touching at the time and now felt ominous. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of reshelving and cataloging. Tasks my hands performed on autopilot while my mind spun through increasingly anxious scenarios. Would I embarrass myself? Would I say something stupid? Do something awkward? Confirm everyone's suspicions that I was better suited to dusty archives than actual human interaction? By 9:30, I was standing in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the red dress hanging from my closet door like an accusation. It was beautiful, objectively speaking. Silk that caught the light, a neckline that suggested without revealing, a hem that ended just above the knee. Riley had insisted it was perfect for my coloring, that it made my boring brown hair look rich, and my pale skin seem luminous instead of sickly. I'd never worn it because looking at it made me feel like a fraud, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The buzzer sounded at exactly 10 o'clock, and I opened the door to find Riley and Sophia already dressed for conquest. Riley, with her glossy black hair and curves that seemed designed to break hearts, wore something silver and dangerous. Sophia, tall and elegant in a way I'd never manage, had chosen emerald green that made her tan skin glow. "Oh, thank God," Riley said, pushing past me into the apartment. "You're actually wearing it. I was prepared to physically wrestle you into submission." "I'm not sure about this," I started, but Sophia was already steering me toward the door, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so willowy. "Nope, no backing out. It's your birthday, and we're celebrating whether you like it or not. We're going to Nocturne." My stomach dropped. "The nightclub? The new one in Tribeca?" "The very same," Riley said, her smile sharpening with mischief. "I know a guy who knows a guy who got us on the VIP list. Apparently, it's impossible to get into normally, but tonight we're special." Nocturne. I knew that name, had seen it in articles about New York nightlife, about the mysterious owner who'd transformed an abandoned warehouse into the city's most exclusive venue, Dominic Valenti's club. The place he owned, operated, the territory he controlled with the same casual authority he'd shown that night 3 years ago. This was a mistake. A terrible, catastrophic mistake. But Riley's arm was already linked through mine, and Sophia was calling for an Uber, and before I could formulate a coherent protest, we were sliding into the back seat of a car that smelled of cheap air freshener and other people's perfume. The drive to Tribeca took 20 minutes that felt like both seconds and hours. My reflection in the window showed a stranger, someone with lips painted dark enough to be bold, eyes lined with precision I'd practiced 5 times before getting right. I looked almost pretty, almost confident, almost like someone who belonged in a place like Nocturne. Almost. The club announced itself from a block away, bass thrumming through the sidewalk like a heartbeat, a line of beautiful people wrapped around the building's corner. The exterior was understated, just a discreet door and a single word etched in chrome letters. Nocturne. "Come on," Riley said, pulling me past the line toward a different entrance where a man the size of a refrigerator stood with a tablet. She spoke to him in low tones, showed him something on her phone, and his expression shifted from bored hostility to professional courtesy. The door swung open, revealing a staircase descending into pulsing light and sound. And just like that, we were inside. The interior of Nocturne was everything the exterior wasn't. Opulent without being gaudy, the space soaring upward into darkness, the walls lined with private booths draped in velvet. The dance floor churned with bodies, lights slicing through manufactured fog, the bar stretching along one wall like an altar to excess. "First round's on me," Sophia shouted over the music, disappearing toward the bar before I could protest. Riley grabbed my hand, pulling me deeper into the club. Isn't this amazing? I heard the owner designed every detail himself. Total control freak, but in a hot way. I didn't respond, too busy scanning the space with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 3 years cataloging details. The security cameras positioned at strategic intervals, disguised as decorative fixtures. The way certain booths on the upper level remained perpetually occupied by men in expensive suits who watched the crowd with predatory attention. The emergency exits, marked but unobtrusive, probably leading to places VIP guests like us would never see. This wasn't just a nightclub. It was a fortress, a kingdom. And somewhere in this controlled chaos was the man who ruled it. Sophia returned with 3 cocktails, something dark and complicated in tall glasses. To Jade, she said, raising hers in a toast. May 24 be the year she finally lives a little. I took a sip, the alcohol burning pleasantly, loosening the knot of anxiety in my chest. 1 drink wouldn't hurt. 1 night of pretending to be normal, to be the kind of person who celebrated birthdays in exclusive nightclubs, who didn't spend her evenings watching a man who didn't know she existed. We danced, or rather, Riley and Sophia danced while I swayed awkwardly, trying to mimic their fluid confidence. The alcohol helped, blurring the edges of my self-consciousness, making the music feel less overwhelming and more like something I could almost surrender to. I was on my 2nd drink, starting to think maybe this wasn't so terrible after all, when it happened. My purse, the small leather crossbody I'd bought specifically because it was supposed to be secure, slipped from my shoulder as I turned. I lunged for it, but someone bumped into me, and it skittered across the floor, disappearing under a table in one of the private booths. Shit, I muttered, dropping to my hands and knees, the music suddenly too loud, the lights too bright. I crawled under the table, my dress riding up, my dignity evaporating with each undignified shuffle forward. My fingers closed around the purse's strap, just as shoes appeared in my peripheral vision. Expensive shoes. Italian leather so soft it probably cost more than my monthly rent. My gaze traveled upward, past tailored trousers, past a shirt that fit with the precision of custom tailoring, past a jawline that could cut glass, to eyes the exact shade of dark espresso I'd cataloged in my memory 3 years ago. Dominic Valenti stood over me, his hand extended not in offer of help, but in expectation. And in that hand, held between his fingers like evidence, was my purse. The purse I'd dropped. The purse he'd apparently retrieved before I could. The purse that contained, tucked in its inner pocket, the diary I'd been keeping for 3 years. The diary filled with pages and pages of observations, of memories, of letters I'd written and never sent. Letters addressed to him, confessing every shameful detail of my obsession, my pathetic, consuming love for a man who didn't know I existed. Our eyes met, and I watched comprehension flicker across his face as his fingers found the zipper, as he began to open it, as he froze. Time fractured into fragments, each second stretching like taffy, as I watched Dominic Valenti's fingers pause on the zipper of my purse. From my undignified position on the floor, still half-crouched beneath the table, I could see the exact moment curiosity shifted into something harder in his expression. His thumb moved, sliding the zipper open with deliberate slowness, and I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. "Please," I whispered, the word barely audible over the pulsing music. "That's mine." His gaze dropped to me, really seeing me for the first time, and I watched recognition flicker across his features. Not recognition of who I was, because how could he possibly remember the forgettable woman he'd helped years ago? But recognition that I was terrified. That whatever was in that purse mattered desperately, which, of course, only made him more interested. "You dropped it," he said, his voice a low rumble that I felt in my chest despite the bass thrumming through the floor. His accent was subtle, Italian syllables softening certain consonants, a remnant of a childhood I knew he'd spent in Sicily. Not because he'd told me, but because I'd read it in the profile piece the Times had published last year. The one I'd saved in a folder on my laptop alongside 47 other articles that mentioned his name. I know. Thank you. Can I have it back? I scrambled to my feet, my knees protesting, my dress twisted awkwardly around my hips. I tugged it down with one hand while reaching for the purse with the other, but he pulled it back, just slightly, just enough to keep it out of reach. In a moment, he said, and then he was turning, walking toward the booth I'd crawled under, sliding into the curved leather seat with fluid grace. The two men already sitting there, both wearing suits that screamed money and menace, immediately stood and moved away without a word, dismissed by nothing more than his presence. I should have run. Should have abandoned the purse, grabbed Riley and Sophia, fled into the night. But my feet carried me forward instead, drawn by the same gravity that had kept me circling his orbit for 3 years. I stood at the edge of the table, my hands clasped in front of me like a supplicant, and watched as he withdrew the small leather-bound book from my purse. The diary. Oh God, the diary. It wasn't even pretty, just a cheap journal I'd bought at a drugstore 2 years ago when the margins of library checkout cards were no longer sufficient to contain my thoughts. The cover was plain brown, the pages slightly warped from where I'd pressed flowers between them. Flowers from the bodega across from his building. Flowers that bloomed in the planter outside Nocturne's entrance. Interesting reading material to bring to a nightclub, Dominic observed, turning the book over in his hands. His fingers were long, elegant, with small scars across the knuckles that spoke of violence casually administered. I'd noticed those scars years ago, had wondered about each one, had imagined tracing them with my fingertips in moments of shameful fantasy. It's private, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Personal. It's just thoughts, nothing important. Then you won't mind if I look. He opened to a random page, and I died 1,000 small deaths as his eyes scanned the words I'd written in my careful librarian's hand. October 15th. Saw him at the coffee shop on Mercer Street. He ordered an espresso, black, no sugar, same as always. He was on his phone, speaking Italian, and even though I couldn't understand the words, I could hear the authority in his voice. The barista, a new girl who didn't know better, tried to flirt with him. He didn't even acknowledge her. I wondered what it would take to earn his acknowledgement. Wondered if I'd ever be brave enough to try. I watched his expression change as he read, watched the slight furrow appear between his brows. He flipped to another page, then another. And I wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the darkness of the club and never exist again. January 3rd. 3 years today since he saved me. I wonder if he remembers. Probably not. I was nobody to him, just another victim in a city full of them. But he was everything. Still is. I know it's wrong. Know I should forget him. Move on. But how do you forget someone who changed the entire trajectory of your existence in the span of 30 seconds? This is about me, Dominic said, and it wasn't a question. He looked up from the diary, his dark eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. You've been watching me. No, I lied automatically, then caught myself. I mean, not like that. Not in a creepy way. I noticed you. Sometimes. In public places. You documented my coffee preferences, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. My schedule. The routes I take through the city. The names of my associates. He flipped through more pages, and I could see the words I'd written. Harmless observations that together formed a damning pattern. Who do you work for? The question caught me off guard. What? I work at the Metropolitan Archives. I'm a librarian. No one catalogs another person's life with this level of detail unless they're being paid to do it, Dominic said, his tone hardening. Or unless they're planning something. So which is it? Information broker? Private investigator? Or are you working for one of my competitors? Horror washed over me as I realized what he was thinking. That my pathetic, obsessive documentation of his existence was some kind of surveillance operation. That I was a threat. I'm not working for anyone, I insisted, my voice rising to be heard over the music. I swear I'm just a librarian. A stupid, lonely librarian who developed an inappropriate fixation on someone she has no business thinking about. That's all this is. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him cataloging details the way I'd cataloged his. My cheap dress that didn't quite fit right, my drugstore makeup, my nervous hands twisting together. The assessment of someone used to identifying threats and dismissing irrelevancies. Sit, he said finally, gesturing to the seat across from him. I should go find my friends, I said, glancing desperately toward the dance floor where Riley and Sophia were probably wondering where I'd disappeared to. Sit, he repeated, and the word carried enough weight that my legs obeyed before my brain could formulate a protest. The leather of the booth was butter soft against my thighs, the table between us suddenly feeling less like furniture and more like a barrier between predator and prey. Dominic set the diary on the table, his hand resting on it possessively, and leaned back in his seat. Tell me about the night we met, he said. Your version. My mouth went dry. You remember? No, he admitted. But apparently you do. In detail. He tapped the diary with one finger. So tell me. I swallowed hard, my throat clicking. It was 3 years ago, November 19th. Thursday night around 9:30, Canal Street Station. A man grabbed my purse and I was too shocked to fight back. You stopped him. Returned my purse. Didn't say anything, just looked at me for a few seconds, and then left. And from that, you developed a 3-year obsession? His tone was skeptical, but I caught something else underneath it. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. I didn't mean to, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I tried to forget, tried to move on. But then I saw your picture in the newspaper a few weeks later, and I looked you up, and then I couldn't stop looking. It became this thing, this habit. I'd walk past your building on my way home from work even though it was out of my way. I'd read articles about your businesses. I trailed off, shame burning in my chest. I know how it sounds. I know it's wrong. But I never approached you, never tried to contact you, never did anything that would actually affect your life. Except document every detail of it, Dominic said, picking up the diary again. He flipped to a page near the middle, and I recognized the date. 6 months ago. June 7th, quote, watched him from across the street as he dealt with the man in the blue sedan. Couldn't hear what was said, but the man looked terrified. Dee touched his shoulder, almost gently, and the man nodded and drove away. The gesture would have seemed friendly to anyone else, but I could see the threat in it. The reminder that kindness from him is a privilege, not a right. My blood turned to ice. That night, I'd been walking home from a late shift, had seen Dominic standing outside Nocturne talking to someone in a parked car. I'd stopped in a doorway across the street, watching, and even from a distance I could sense the tension in the interaction. What else did you see that night? Dominic asked, his voice soft in a way that made my survival instincts scream. Nothing, I said quickly, too quickly. Just what I wrote. I kept walking after a minute, went home. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and set it face down on the table. Here's what I think, he said, his tone conversational, almost friendly. I think you're telling the truth about being a librarian. The detail orientation, the careful documentation, the social awkwardness. It all fits. But I also think you've seen and heard more than what's in this diary. Things you didn't write down because some part of you knew it was dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered. The man in the blue sedan, Dominic continued as if I hadn't spoken. He owed me a significant amount of money. He was also considering testifying against me in an ongoing investigation. That conversation you witnessed was me convincing him that neither option was in his best interest. I didn't hear anything, I insisted. I was too far away. Perhaps, Dominic allowed. But you were there. You saw. And now I have to decide what to do about that. The threat in his words was unmistakable, and my hands began to tremble. I would never tell anyone. I haven't for 3 years, have I? Everything I know, everything I've seen, it stayed in that diary. Just observations. Just my thoughts. Thoughts that could be very valuable to the right people, he said. The district attorney, for instance. Or the FBI. Or any number of my competitors who would pay well for the kind of detailed surveillance you've been conducting. It's not surveillance. The words burst out of me, louder than intended. Several people at nearby tables glanced over, and I lowered my voice to an urgent whisper. It's not surveillance. It's just pathetic stalking by a lonely woman who developed a crush on someone completely out of her league. That's all it is. Dominic's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, his expression darkening, then looked back at me. Stay here, he said, sliding out of the booth. Don't move, don't leave, don't talk to anyone. I'll be back in 5 minutes, and we're going to continue this conversation. My friends, I started, but he cut me off. We'll be fine without you for a few minutes. Stay. He picked up the diary, tucking it into his jacket pocket, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of someone who owned every space he occupied. I sat frozen in the booth, my mind racing. I should run. Should grab Riley and Sophia and flee while I had the chance. But something kept me pinned in place, some combination of fear and that same magnetic pull that had kept me orbiting his life for 3 years. A woman appeared at the table, tall and elegant in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Mr. Valenti asked me to keep you company, she said, sliding into the seat he'd vacated. Her smile was polished and professional, but her eyes were calculating. I'm Natasha. I manage the VIP services here at Nocturne. I'm fine alone, I said, but she didn't move. He insisted, Natasha said, and I understood that I was being guarded, kept in place. Would you like another drink? Something to eat? I'd like my purse back, I said, realizing for the first time that Dominic had taken it with him along with the diary. I'm sure Mr. Valenti will return it shortly, Natasha said, her tone suggesting the subject was closed. We sat in uncomfortable silence, the music pounding around us, and I watched Natasha watch me, cataloging, assessing, reporting back through some invisible channel to her employer. I'd become a specimen under observation, a problem to be analyzed and solved. When Dominic returned exactly 5 minutes later, he wasn't alone. The man with him was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a suit as expensive as Dominic's, but carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd moved beyond needing to prove anything. Jade Winters, Dominic said, and hearing my full name in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This is Marcus Bellini. He has some questions for you. Marcus slid into the booth beside Natasha, who immediately stood and left without a word. He smiled at me, friendly and warm, but I could see the predator beneath the pleasant exterior. Ms. Winters, he said, his voice carrying a heavier Italian accent than Dominic's. I've just had a very interesting conversation with the head of security at the Metropolitan Archives. Lovely woman, Mrs. Patterson. She had glowing things to say about you. Very dedicated employee, always punctual, absolutely trustworthy with sensitive materials. My stomach dropped. They'd called my boss. They'd reached out to my workplace within 5 minutes of learning where I worked. She also mentioned, Marcus continued, that you have security clearance for the restricted collections, access to historical documents that are not available to the general public. Is that correct? Yes, I whispered. But I would never. Of course not, Marcus said smoothly. That wasn't my implication. I'm simply establishing that you're a person who can be trusted with sensitive information, who understands discretion. He paused, letting the words sink in. The question is whether that discretion extends beyond your professional life. It does, I said quickly. I swear I've never told anyone anything, not about what I've seen, not about. I gestured helplessly at where the diary had been. 3 years, Dominic said, pulling my attention back to him. He'd sat down across from me again, his presence overwhelming in the confined space of the booth. You've been watching me for 3 years, writing about me, following me, and in all that time you never once tried to approach me, never tried to use what you knew. Why? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that my answer mattered more than I'd understood. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was an interrogation, and my life might depend on how I responded. Because, I said, the truth scraping my throat raw, approaching you would have required courage I don't have, and using what I knew would have required being the kind of person I'm not. I'm not brave, Mr. Valenti. I'm not clever or ambitious or interesting. I'm just someone who saw something beautiful and dangerous and couldn't look away. Silence. Marcus and Dominic exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. Beautiful, Dominic repeated, something shifting in his expression. You think I'm beautiful? Heat flooded my face. That's what you got from that? I just confessed to 3 years of stalking you, to documenting your life, to potentially witnessing God knows what illegal activities. And you're stuck on the word beautiful? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I'm stuck on the fact that you're either the best actress I've ever met, or you're telling the truth. She's telling the truth, Marcus said, his tone certain. I've interrogated enough liars to know one when I see one. This one? He gestured at me almost fondly. Couldn't lie to save her life. Which presents a different problem, Dominic said, his gaze never leaving mine. If you can't lie, and you know things that could hurt me, then you're a liability I can't afford to ignore. Terror locked my muscles. This was it. The moment where my pathetic obsession, my stupid, shameful watching got me killed. I thought of Riley and Sophia, probably still dancing, wondering where I'd gone. Thought of my tiny studio apartment with its carefully organized bookshelves. Thought of all the stories I'd never finish reading. However, Dominic continued, and I dared to breathe again. You're also potentially an asset. Someone with your attention to detail, your discretion, your ability to observe without being noticed. That could be useful. I blinked, confusion cutting through fear. Useful how? That remains to be determined, he said, pulling my purse from his jacket and setting it on the table between us. For now, consider this a probationary period. You're going to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, working at the library, living your life. But now, you're going to do it with my explicit knowledge and permission. I don't understand, I said, though some part of me did. Some part of me that was already cataloging the implications. You're going to work for me, Dominic said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Part-time when I need you. Observing, documenting, reporting back. And in exchange, I'm going to ensure your safety. Because now that I know about you, Ms. Winters, others might soon know as well. And I protect what's mine. Mine. The word echoed in my ears, a claim and a cage all at once. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You won't." The business card Dominic pressed into my palm felt heavier than it should. Thick cardstock with raised lettering that spelled out a name and a phone number. Nothing else. No company, no title, just the essential information rendered in elegant simplicity. I stared at it as Marcus and Dominic stood, the two men towering over me in my seated position. "Call that number tomorrow," Dominic said. "Someone will give you instructions." "Tomorrow's Saturday," I said stupidly, as if that mattered, as if the normal rhythms of the work week held any meaning in whatever world I'd just stumbled into. "I'm aware," Dominic replied, his tone dry. "The instructions will be simple. Follow them precisely." They left me there in the booth, surrounded by the pulsing chaos of Nocturne, my purse returned but my diary still in Dominic's possession. Collateral, I realized. Insurance that I would comply. I found Riley and Sophia right where I'd left them, dancing with a group of men who melted away as I approached. Riley took one look at my face, and her expression shifted from tipsy joy to concern. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to go home," I said, my voice flat. "I'm sorry. I know it's my birthday, but I can't. I need to leave." Sophia exchanged a glance with Riley, some silent communication passing between them. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's get you home." The ride back to my apartment passed in a blur. Riley and Sophia peppered me with questions I couldn't answer, concern giving way to frustration when I remained silent. By the time we reached my building, they'd given up, extracting only a promise that I'd text them in the morning to let them know I was okay. I wasn't okay. I didn't sleep that night, instead lying on my bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the encounter. The way Dominic's fingers had looked holding my diary, the certainty in his voice when he'd claimed me as his, the understanding that my life had fundamentally changed in the span of 30 minutes. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and I woke to harsh afternoon sunlight streaming through my curtains and my phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. An unknown number. My hands shook as I answered. "Hello?" "Ms. Winters." The voice was female, crisp and professional. "Mr. Valenti has requested your presence at his residence this evening at 7. An address has been sent to your phone along with a car service confirmation. The driver will arrive at your building at 6:30. Dress code is business casual. Do you have any questions?" I had about 1,000 questions, but the only one that made it past my lips was, "What if I can't make it? Then Mr. Valenti will be very disappointed." The implication was clear. Disappointing Dominic Valenti was not advisable. "We'll see you at 7, Ms. Winters." She disconnected before I could respond. I checked my messages to find the promised address, a building in the West Village that I recognized from one of my documented walks. The building I knew, from careful observation, that Dominic called home. The rest of the day crawled by in agonizing slow motion. I tried to read, to distract myself, but the words blurred together. I tried to eat, but nothing settled in my stomach. Finally, at 6, I forced myself to shower and dress in the most business casual outfit I owned. Black slacks and a cream blouse that I usually saved for meetings with department heads. The car arrived precisely at 6:30, a sleek black sedan that looked wildly out of place on my shabby street. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, held the door for me without comment. The drive to the West Village took 20 minutes. We pulled up in front of a converted warehouse with industrial windows and a discreet entrance. The driver came around to open my door, gesturing toward the building. "Top floor," he said. "The elevator code is 1119. The date we'd met. The date of the subway rescue." My hands went cold. The building's lobby was minimalist and modern, all concrete and steel with strategic lighting that made the space feel expensive rather than industrial. The elevator was the kind that required a code, and when I entered the numbers, it rose smoothly, without stops, directly to the penthouse. The doors opened onto a private foyer, and Dominic stood there waiting, dressed in dark jeans and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Casual in a way I'd never seen him, but no less commanding for it. "Ms. Winters," he said, gesturing for me to enter. "Thank you for coming." As if I'd had a choice. His apartment was exactly what I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. Open plan, with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. But instead of the cold minimalism I'd anticipated, the space felt lived in. Books lined custom shelves, their spines worn from reading. Art covered the walls, pieces I recognized from my studies. Original works worth more than most people's houses. "Wine?" Dominic asked, moving to a kitchen that looked like something from an architectural magazine. "I don't drink," I lied, then caught myself. "I mean, not usually, not much." He poured 2 glasses anyway, red wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and handed one to me. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather sofa that faced the windows. I perched on the edge of the seat, the wine glass cradled in my hands. Dominic sat across from me in a matching chair, close enough to maintain the intimacy of conversation, far enough to avoid crowding. "I've read your diary," he said without preamble, cover to cover. Twice. Mortification washed over me in waves. "I'm sorry you had to do that. Don't apologize." He took a sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving my face. It was illuminating. "You have a gift for observation, Ms. Winters. Details most people would miss, patterns most people wouldn't recognize. You documented my life with the precision of a detective or a historian." "A stalker," I corrected miserably. "Let's call it what it is. If you were a stalker, you would have done something with the information. Tried to insert yourself into my life. Sought attention or profit." He leaned forward slightly. "But you didn't. You just watched and wrote and kept it all to yourself. Why?" "Because the reality would have ruined the fantasy," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "As long as I just observed from a distance, I could imagine you were someone I could actually know. Someone accessible. Someone who might—" I cut myself off, heat flooding my face. "Someone who might what?" Dominic prompted, his voice softer than I'd heard it. "Someone who might see me," I finished quietly. "Really see me, not just look past me like everyone else does." The silence that followed felt heavy with meaning I couldn't decipher. Dominic set down his wine glass and stood, walking to the windows. The city spread out below him, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over Manhattan. 3 years ago, he said, his back to me, I stopped a mugging in a subway station, returned a purse to a woman who looked terrified. I remember thinking she reminded me of something fragile, a bird with a broken wing. My breath caught. He did remember. "I walked away because that's what I do," he continued. "I don't get involved in people's lives, don't form attachments, don't allow weakness." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my heart stutter. And then, yesterday, I found out that the broken bird had been circling my orbit for 3 years, documenting my existence, writing love letters she never intended to send. "They weren't love letters," I protested weakly. "No." He crossed to a side table and picked up my diary, which had been sitting there waiting. He opened to a page I recognized by the pressed flower tucked between the entries. December 24th, quote, "Watched him leave flowers at a grave in Queens. It was sleeting, and he stood there for 20 minutes, just standing. I wanted to offer an umbrella, to provide some small comfort, but I couldn't. Instead, I picked up one of the flowers that blew away from the grave and pressed it in these pages. A piece of his grief, preserved. I know it's wrong, but I wanted to carry some part of his pain so he wouldn't have to bear it alone. He held up the page, showing me the dried rose I'd pressed there, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "That's not a love letter?" Dominic asked, his voice rough. "What would you call it?" "A delusion," I whispered. "A fantasy written by someone too pathetic to have a real relationship." He closed the diary carefully and set it aside. "Tell me about your relationships, Jade. How many have you had?" The use of my first name sent a shiver through me. "That's not relevant." "Humor me." I took a large sip of wine, needing the liquid courage. "One. In college. It lasted 6 weeks. He broke up with me because I was too intense and not intense enough at the same time. Whatever that means. And since then, nothing," I admitted. "I work, I read, I go home. That's my life. Except for the walking past my building, the documenting my schedule, the pressing flowers from my mother's grave. His mother. I'd guessed that from the dates, from the frequency of his visits, but hearing it confirmed made the violation of my observation feel even worse. "I'm sorry," I said again, meaning it. "I know it's invasive. I know it's wrong. If I could take it back—" "I don't want you to take it back," Dominic interrupted, and the words hung in the air between us, impossible and dangerous. "I want you to explain it. Make me understand how someone becomes so fixated on a stranger that they organize their life around glimpses and observations." How could I explain something I barely understood myself? "You saved me," I tried. Not just from the mugger, but from invisibility. For 30 seconds, you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth protecting, and I've been chasing that feeling ever since. That's not healthy, Jade. "I know," I said, setting down my wine glass before I dropped it. "Believe me, I know. I've told myself 1,000 times to stop, to delete the diary, to take a different route home, but I couldn't. You became this bright spot in my gray life, and I couldn't let it go." Dominic moved then, crossing the space between us and sitting on the sofa beside me. Not touching, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "The things you've witnessed," he said, his voice low. "The conversations you've observed, the people you've seen me with. Do you understand what they mean?" "I have theories," I admitted, "based on context clues and research, but I don't know anything for certain." "Theories," he repeated, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Such a librarian word. Tell me your theories, Jade." I swallowed hard. "I think you run an organization that operates outside legal boundaries. I think the people who work for you are loyal because they're either afraid or well compensated or both. I think the businesses you own are legitimate on the surface, but serve other purposes underneath. And I think—" I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. "I think you're dangerous in ways I can't fully comprehend, but for some reason, that doesn't scare me as much as it should." "It should terrify you," Dominic said, his voice hard. "What I am, what I do, it's not romantic. It's not something to be observed from a safe distance and romanticized in diary entries. It's brutal and bloody and ruins everything it touches." "Then why am I here?" I asked, turning to face him. "If I'm such a liability, if I know too much, why not just deal with me the way you dealt with the man in the blue sedan?" His jaw tightened. "Because you're not a threat. You're a complication." "What's the difference?" "A threat I eliminate," he said simply. "A complication I manage. And you, Jade Winters, are the most intriguing complication I've encountered in years." We sat in charged silence, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine, could hear the slight change in his breathing, This close, I could see the faint scar bisecting his eyebrow that I'd catalogued from a distance, could count the dark lashes that framed those espresso eyes. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Really?" Dominic reached out, his fingers brushing my chin, tilting my face toward his. The touch sent electricity racing along my nerve endings. "I want to understand you," he said. "I want to know what makes someone brave enough to observe my life for 3 years, but too afraid to live her own. I want to know if this obsession of yours is real, or if proximity will shatter the illusion." His thumb traced my jawline, a touch so gentle it felt like a question. "And I want to know if you truly understand what you're getting into by entering my world." "I don't," I admitted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't understand any of this. But I want to." His eyes searched mine for a long moment, and I saw something shift in their depths. A decision being made, a line being crossed. "Then let's make a deal," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd heard him use on the phone when he didn't know I was listening. "You work for me, officially. You use those observation skills, that attention to detail, to help me with certain situations that require discretion. In exchange, I'll give you what you've been seeking: access, understanding, the reality behind the fantasy you've built." "And if the reality disappoints me?" I asked. His smile was sharp and knowing. "Then at least you'll be free of this obsession. You can move on with your life knowing exactly what you were wasting 3 years watching." It was a deal with the devil, and we both knew it. But I was already nodding, already agreeing, already crossing a threshold I could never step back over. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll do it." Dominic's hand fell away from my face, and he stood, the moment of intimacy vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Back to business, back to control. "Good," he said. "We start Monday. Someone will contact you with your first assignment. For now." He picked up my diary and held it out to me. "This is yours. I've had copies made for security purposes, but the original belongs to you." I took it, the leather warm from his hands, and clutched it to my chest like a shield. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Dominic said, his expression unreadable. "You have no idea what you've just agreed to." He walked me to the elevator, maintaining a careful distance that felt like both protection and rejection. As the doors began to close, he spoke one last time. "Jade? That night in the subway? I remember thinking you had the saddest eyes I'd ever seen, like you'd already given up on something essential." The doors slid shut on his next words, but I could still hear them, echoing in my mind. "I'm going to find out what it was." Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a deadline. I went through my routine at the library with mechanical precision, reshelving returned books, processing new acquisitions, avoiding Mrs. Patterson's penetrating gaze whenever possible. She knew something had changed. I could see it in the way she watched me, cataloging my distraction with the same careful attention I'd applied to Dominic's life. The text came at 2:17 p.m., interrupting my lunch break. "Unknown number. You have a package at the front desk. Collect it immediately." The package was a slim manila envelope with my name typed on the label. No return address, no identifying marks. I waited until I was alone in the break room to open it, my fingers clumsy with anxiety. Inside was a new phone, sleek and expensive, and a single card with typed instructions. "This is your work phone. Keep it on you always. Memorize this number: 212-550147. Delete this card after reading. Someone will call you at 6 p.m. with your first assignment. Do not discuss this with anyone." I stared at the phone for a long moment, the weight of it in my palm feeling like an anchor pulling me under. I could stop this, could throw the phone away, block the numbers, tell Dominic I'd changed my mind, but the memory of his thumb tracing my jawline stopped me. The promise of understanding, of finally being seen. The addictive possibility that maybe, just maybe, proximity wouldn't shatter the fantasy but make it real. I deleted the card's information from my memory with the same precision I'd used to memorize Dominic's schedule over 3 years. Then I slipped the new phone into my purse beside my personal one and returned to work. The call came exactly at 6 p.m. I was on the subway heading home, wedged between a businessman shouting into his Bluetooth and a teenager whose music leaked from their headphones. I answered on the second ring. Ms. Winters. It was Marcus Bellini's voice, warm and professional. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, I said, pressing the phone closer to my ear to hear over the subway noise. What do you need? Tonight, 8 p.m. There's a meeting at Nocturne. Mr. Valenti needs you to observe and document. You'll be positioned in the VIP section with a clear view of booth 7. Natasha will provide you with the necessary equipment when you arrive. Equipment? I repeated, confused. Recording devices, mostly. Don't worry, they're simple to use. He paused. Ms. Winters, I should mention that what you'll be witnessing tonight may be uncomfortable. If at any point you feel unsafe or wish to leave, there will be security personnel nearby. Simply tell them you need air, and they'll escort you out. The warning sent ice through my veins. What kind of meeting is this? The kind where we need an impartial observer, Marcus said. Someone who can document what's said without the bias of prior relationships. You're perfect for this, because you have no stake in the outcome. After he hung up, I sat frozen in my seat as the subway rattled through the tunnels. What had I agreed to? What was I walking into? I went home, changed into the same black dress I'd worn Friday night, the only nice thing I owned, and arrived at Nocturne at 7:45. Natasha was waiting at the VIP entrance, her professional smile firmly in place. Right on time, she said, leading me through a private corridor I hadn't known existed. We emerged in a small room overlooking the main club, separated from the noise by thick glass. Through the one-way mirror, I could see booth 7 clearly. Natasha handed me a small device that looked like an expensive pen. Voice recorder, she explained. It will pick up audio from the booth through this. She pointed to what looked like a decorative speaker mounted on the wall. High directional microphone. You'll hear everything they say. Your job is to take notes on the conversation. Not word-for-word transcription, but key points. Names, numbers, agreements reached. Why not just record it? I asked. We are recording it, Natasha said. But Mr. Valenti values human interpretation, nuance, context. That's where you come in. She gestured to a laptop set up on the small desk. Take notes there. They'll be encrypted and sent directly to Mr. Valenti's secure server. She left me alone in the observation room, and I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling. This was surveillance. Real surveillance. Not my harmless watching from street corners. This was participating in whatever Dominic's business actually was. At precisely 8 p.m., people began arriving at booth 7. I recognized one of them from my observations. A heavy-set man in his 50s who always arrived at Nocturne in a Mercedes with diplomatic plates. The others were strangers, but they moved with the same confident arrogance of people used to power. Dominic arrived last, Marcus at his side. He slid into the booth with fluid grace, and even through the one-way glass, I could feel the shift in energy. Everyone deferred to him without question. The conversation that followed was exactly what Marcus had warned me about. Uncomfortable. There was talk of territory and percentage points, of shipments and routes, of officials who needed convincing and competitors who needed warnings. Nothing explicitly illegal, but the implications were clear to anyone listening. I took notes, my fingers flying over the keyboard, documenting the careful dance of negotiation happening below. The heavy-set man wanted something, concessions that Dominic was unwilling to grant. The tension escalated slowly, professionally. until the man made a mistake. He threatened Dominic, implied that he had options, other allies who might be more amenable to his terms. The change in Dominic was instantaneous. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move abruptly, but something shifted in his posture, something cold and deadly that made everyone at the table go still. "Let me be clear," Dominic said, his voice carrying perfectly through the microphone. "You have no options, no allies who wouldn't sell you out the moment it benefited them. What you have is this: my patience, which is finite, and my goodwill, which you're currently exhausting." The heavyset man tried to backtrack, to smooth over the threat, but Dominic raised a hand, cutting him off. "We're done here," he said. "You'll accept my terms, or you'll find yourself explaining to your other allies why you're suddenly a liability instead of an asset. Those are your options." The meeting ended shortly after. I watched the men file out, the heavyset one looking pale and shaken. Dominic remained in the booth with Marcus, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. My phone buzzed. A text from the work number. "Come down to the booth." My legs felt unsteady as I made my way down from the observation room. The club was busy now. Bodies pressed together on the dance floor, the bass thrumming through my chest. The booth seemed miles away across that crowded space. Dominic watched me approach, his expression unreadable. Marcus stood as I arrived, offering me his seat with a polite nod before disappearing into the crowd. "Well?" Dominic asked, gesturing for me to sit. I slid into the booth, acutely aware of how close we were in the confined space. "I took notes like you asked. They're on the laptop." "I've already read them," he said. "You're thorough. Captured the important details without getting bogged down in irrelevant conversation." "I had practice," I said, then immediately regretted the reference to my diary. Dominic's mouth quirked. "Indeed. Tell me, Jade, what did you think of what you witnessed tonight?" I chose my words carefully. "I think that man made a tactical error. He thought he had leverage he didn't actually possess." "And what else?" I met his gaze. "I think you let him believe he had options before demonstrating that he didn't. It was calculated. A lesson, not just for him, but for everyone else at that table. Something that might have been approval flickered in Dominic's eyes. You understand power dynamics." "I understand observation," I corrected. "And what I observed was a demonstration of control." "Does it bother you?" he asked. "Watching that, being part of it?" I considered the question honestly. It should bother me, should trigger some moral outrage, some instinct to report what I'd seen. But instead, I felt something else. Fascination. The same magnetic pull that had kept me documenting his life for 3 years. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Ask me again after I've had time to process." Dominic studied me for a long moment, then signaled to someone I couldn't see. A waitress appeared with 2 glasses of wine. "You did well tonight," he said, handing me one. "Better than I expected for a first assignment." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go home. Tomorrow you go to work like normal. When I need you again, you'll receive a message." He paused. "Unless you want to leave now. Walk away from this arrangement. I'd understand." It was a test, I realized. A chance to prove I was committed, or an opportunity to escape. My answer would determine everything that came next. I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue. "I'm not walking away." "Why not?" Dominic asked, and I heard genuine curiosity in the question. "Because 3 years of watching you from a distance taught me nothing real," I said. "This, tonight, uncomfortable as it was, taught me more about who you actually are than all my observations combined. And I want to understand. Need to understand." "Even if understanding changes how you see me?" he challenged. "Even if the reality destroys whatever fantasy you've been holding on to?" "Especially then," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice, because anything is better than the limbo I've been living in. This half-life of observation without participation. Dominic set down his wine glass, his gaze never leaving mine. You might regret that position, Jade. My world has a way of consuming people who enter it unprepared. Then prepare me, I said. Isn't that what this is? An education? His smile was slow and dangerous. Among other things. We sat in the booth for another hour, talking in the carefully neutral way of two people circling something neither was ready to name. Dominic asked questions about my work at the library, about the books I preferred, about the life I'd built in careful isolation. I asked questions about Nocturne, about the art on his apartment walls, about anything that didn't directly address the dangerous business I'd witnessed. When he finally walked me out to the waiting car, his hand settled at the small of my back, a touch that felt both possessive and protective. The same touch I'd observed him using with others, but now directed at me. Tomorrow night, he said, as I slid into the back seat. Dinner, my apartment, 7 p.m. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I'll be there. As the car pulled away from Nocturne, I watched Dominic's figure recede in the rearview mirror, a dark silhouette against the club's lights. I'd crossed another threshold tonight, moved from observer to participant, from fantasy to dangerous reality. And despite everything I'd witnessed, every instinct screaming that I should run, I knew with absolute certainty that I would show up tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night he asked me to. Because the broken bird he'd saved 3 years ago had spent all that time learning to fly in circles around him. Now she was being invited into the cage, and she was walking in with open eyes. The flowers arrived at the library Tuesday afternoon, delivered during the quiet lull between lunch and the after-work rush. Mrs. Patterson brought them to my desk personally, her eyebrows raised in speculation as she set down the crystal vase filled with white roses and something I didn't recognize. Dark purple blooms with an intoxicating scent that seemed to fill the entire rare books section. Someone has an admirer, she said, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes bright with curiosity. I pulled the small card from its envelope with trembling fingers. The handwriting was precise, controlled, distinctly masculine. For the broken bird who's learning to fly. See you at 7. D. A friend, I said quickly, tucking the card into my pocket before Mrs. Patterson could read it. She hummed noncommittally, but I caught her watching me throughout the rest of the afternoon, cataloging this deviation from my normal routine the way I'd cataloged Dominic's. I looked up the purple flowers during my break. Aconitum, monkshood, wolfsbane, beautiful, fragrant, and lethally poisonous. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Everything about Dominic was beautiful and dangerous in equal measure, and I was walking toward it anyway. At 6:30, I left the library in the same black dress I'd worn the night before. I'd brought it in a garment bag, changed in the staff bathroom, applied makeup with hands that shook slightly. Riley had texted 3 times asking where I'd disappeared to Friday night, but I'd pleaded exhaustion and work stress, promises to catch up soon that I wasn't sure I could keep. How did you explain to your friends that you'd been conscripted into working for a man who operated outside legal boundaries? That you were complicit in surveillance that was probably illegal? That you were willingly walking into deeper waters with no idea how to swim? The car arrived exactly on time. Same driver, same professional courtesy. This time, when we pulled up to Dominic's building, he was waiting in the lobby, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made him look softer somehow, more approachable. The illusion vanished when our eyes met, and I saw the predatory intensity in his gaze. Jade, he greeted me, my name in his mouth still sending shivers along my spine. Thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful. Do you know what they mean? He asked, guiding me toward the elevator with that same possessive hand at the small of my back. I looked them up, I admitted. Monkshood, Deadly nightshade. Very subtle messaging. His laugh was genuine, surprising me. I thought you'd appreciate the literary reference, beauty and danger intertwined. It seemed appropriate. The elevator rose smoothly to his penthouse. When the doors opened, I caught the scent of cooking, something rich and savory that made my stomach growl despite my nerves. You cook? I asked, surprised. When I have the time, Dominic said, leading me into the open kitchen. My grandmother insisted I learn. Said a man who couldn't feed himself was no man at all. I perched on a bar stool while he moved through the space with the same fluid confidence he brought to everything else. Watching him cook felt strangely intimate, more personal than the business meeting I'd observed the night before. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and scattered with small scars. I recognized one of them from my observations, a burn mark he'd gotten 2 years ago that I'd never known the source of. How did you get that scar? I asked, pointing. The burn on your left forearm. Dominic glanced down, then back at me with an unreadable expression. You noticed that? I notice everything about you, I said, the wine I'd accepted making me bolder. It appeared after a trip to Sicily in March 2 years ago. You favored that arm for about 2 weeks afterward. He was quiet for a long moment, his knife moving with practiced precision through vegetables. There was a disagreement with some associates. Things got heated in multiple senses of the word. Someone knocked over a candle during the discussion. Discussion, I repeated. Is that what you call it? What would you call it? He challenged, turning to face me fully. I don't know, I admitted. That's the problem. I have 3 years of observations, but no context. I see the effects, but never the causes. The reactions, but not the provocations. Dominic set down his knife and moved around the kitchen island to stand in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Is that what you want? He asked, his voice low. Context? The full picture of what I am, what I do. My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes. It won't be pretty, Jade. The reality is uglier than whatever you've imagined. I never imagined it was pretty, I said. I imagined it was necessary. At least to you. I imagined there were reasons, justifications, a code that governed the violence. Something shifted in his expression. You've given this a lot of thought. 3 years' worth, I reminded him. He reached out, his fingers brushing along my jawline the way they had Saturday night. Ask me anything. Tonight I'll answer honestly. Give you the context you're craving. The offer felt dangerous and seductive. Why did you save me that night? In the subway? Because I could, Dominic said simply. Because you looked terrified and small and I happened to be there. I didn't think about it, just acted. Do you do that often? Save random people? Not as often as you might think, he admitted. Usually I mind my own business. But something about you. He paused, his thumb tracing my bottom lip. You looked lost, like you'd already accepted something terrible was about to happen. I had, I whispered. I was holding my purse thinking at least it's just things, replaceable things. My life wasn't worth fighting for over a bag. Dominic's hand fell away, his expression hardening. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's honest, I said. I'm good at honest when it doesn't require courage. But you're here now, he pointed out. In my home. Working for me. Knowing what I am. That takes courage. Or stupidity, I countered. I haven't decided which yet. He smiled, returning to the stove. Perhaps both. We ate dinner at the table by the windows. The city spread out beneath us like scattered jewels. Dominic had made osso buco, the meat falling off the bone, the flavors rich and complex. We talked through the meal, my questions growing bolder with each glass of wine. his answers becoming progressively more revealing. I learned about his childhood in Sicily, about the poverty that had driven his family to New York when he was 10, about his father's business that had been passed down to Dominic when he was barely 25, about the impossible choice between honoring that legacy and building something legitimate. I tried going straight, he said, swirling wine in his glass. Went to business school, got my MBA, started several legal enterprises, but the family business... He paused. It's not something you just walk away from. There are obligations, expectations, people depending on structures that have existed for generations. So, you manage both, I said. The legitimate businesses and the family obligations. It's not that simple. The lines blur. Money from one enterprise funds another. Connections made through legitimate channels serve less legitimate purposes. He met my gaze. I'm not making excuses. I know what I am. But I'm also not the monster you might think. What are you then? I asked. Practical, Dominic said. The world doesn't run on laws and morality, Jade. It runs on power and leverage. Understanding that, using it, that's what I do. And last night, that meeting? A negotiation with someone who thought he could play in my world without paying the entry fee, Dominic explained. He wanted access to routes I control, wanted to use my infrastructure without compensating me fairly. I corrected his misconceptions. Through threats. Through clarity, he corrected. I made the reality of his position clear. What he does with that information is his choice. I absorbed this, turning it over in my mind. You see it as providing a service, structure and chaos. Essentially, yes. Someone will control these industries, these channels. Better me than someone with fewer scruples. Fewer scruples than threatening people? Dominic's smile was sharp. You'd be surprised how much worse it could be. I don't deal in human trafficking. Don't touch drugs that target children. Have rules about civilian casualties. Others in my position aren't so discriminating. It was a thin moral line, but I could see the logic. Lesser evils. Controlled chaos. He was right that someone would fill these spaces. Maybe him being that someone, with his codes and boundaries, was better than the alternatives. You're not running, Dominic observed, watching me process. Not looking at me with disgust or horror. Why? Because I already knew, I said. Not the details, but the general shape of it. I chose to keep watching anyway. Chose to accept your offer. This is just confirmation of what I'd already accepted. He stood, moving to the windows. Come here. I joined him, standing close enough that our shoulders almost touched. The city sprawled beneath us, millions of lives being lived in ignorance of the structures that actually governed their world. See that building? Dominic pointed to a gleaming tower in Midtown. I own it, legitimately. Bought it with money made from Nocturne's profits. Inside are offices for dozens of small businesses, startups that couldn't afford Midtown rent otherwise. I keep the rates low, reinvest profits into the community. He pointed to another location. That neighborhood? Crime rate dropped 40% in the last 3 years because my people keep order. The police can't or won't, so we do. Is it legal? No. Is it effective? Yes. You're showing me the good you do, I said quietly, to balance the bad. I'm showing you the complexity, Dominic corrected. The full picture you asked for. I'm not a villain, Jade, but I'm not a hero either. I'm a man trying to manage an impossible situation with the tools I have available. I turned to face him, emboldened by wine and proximity, and 3 years of pent-up longing. What do you want from me, Dominic? Really? It's not just observation. You could hire professionals for that. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. I want to understand your obsession by feeding it. Want to see what happens when fantasy meets reality. Want to know if proximity will cure you of this fixation or intensify it. And if it intensifies, I breathed, then we deal with that complication when it arises. His face moved closer, his lips hovering just above mine. But right now, I want to kiss the woman who's been watching me for 3 years, who pressed flowers from my mother's grave in her diary, who took notes on my coffee preferences like they were sacred texts. Yes, I whispered, giving permission I didn't know I was granting. His kiss was nothing like I'd imagined during 3 years of pathetic fantasizing. It was controlled but intense, claiming but not demanding. His hand threaded through my hair while the other settled at my waist, pulling me flush against him. I melted into it, into him, my hands finding purchase on his shoulders. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Dominic rested his forehead against mine. "This changes things," he said. "I know," I replied, my hand still clutching his sweater. "You work for me. Anything between us is a complication. I know that too." He pulled back enough to meet my eyes. "Are you sure this is what you want? Not the fantasy version. The real version. With all its complications." I thought about my tiny apartment, my quiet life, my careful routines, 3 years of safety and invisibility, and slowly suffocating loneliness. Then I thought about standing here in his arms, finally seen, finally acknowledged, finally real. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." Dominic's smile was slow and devastating. "Then we take this slow. Carefully. I won't rush you into my world faster than you can handle." "What if I want to be rushed?" I asked, surprising myself. "Then I'll be the reasonable one," he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Because one of us needs to be." He called the car to take me home shortly after, both of us understanding that staying would push things further than either was ready for. But as I rode through the city streets, my lips still tingling from his kiss, I couldn't bring myself to regret any of it. I'd spent 3 years orbiting him from a distance. Now I was being pulled into his gravity well, and instead of fighting it, I was surrendering completely. The broken bird was learning to fly, but she was learning to fly toward the dangerous thing that had saved her, not away from it. 3 weeks passed in a blur of doubled existence. By day, I was Jade Winters, librarian, reshelving books and processing acquisitions with the same careful precision I'd always employed. By night, I transformed into something else entirely. Dominic's observer, his documenter, his increasingly complicated entanglement. The assignments varied. Sometimes I observed meetings like the first one, taking notes that I'd later discover were used in negotiations or leverage situations. Sometimes I researched individuals Dominic was considering business relationships with, using my library access to dig through public records and archived newspapers. Once, I was asked to attend a gallery opening and simply watch who spoke to whom, mapping social connections that I wouldn't understand the importance of until later. And through it all, there was Dominic himself. Dinners at his apartment became routine, the boundary between professional and personal blurring with each passing evening. We'd talk for hours, his questions drawing out parts of myself I'd kept carefully hidden. My childhood moving from city to city as my father chased failed business ventures. My mother's death when I was 16, my retreat into books as a form of self-protection. In return, he revealed himself in careful increments. His relationship with his mother before her death. His complicated feelings about the empire he'd inherited. His genuine love for art and literature that seemed at odds with his dangerous profession. We kissed again, multiple times, each encounter more intense than the last. But Dominic maintained firm boundaries, never letting things progress past a certain point. At first, I thought it was chivalry. Later, I realized it was control. He was managing this complication the same way he managed everything else, with calculated precision. It was on a Wednesday evening, 3.5 weeks after that first kiss, that everything changed. I'd been summoned to Nocturne for what I assumed would be another observation assignment. Instead, when I arrived, Marcus met me at the private entrance, his usually warm expression tight with concern. "There's a situation," he said without preamble. "Mr. Valenti needs you upstairs immediately." The upstairs offices at Nocturne were territory I'd never accessed before. Marcus led me through a maze of corridors to a heavy door guarded by 2 men with visible weapons. They stepped aside at Marcus's nod, and I was ushered into what appeared to be a security control room. Dominic stood before a wall of monitors, his posture rigid with barely controlled fury. When he turned to face me, I saw an expression I'd never witnessed before. Not anger, but cold, calculating rage. "Tell me," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "about your friend Riley Chen." The question blindsided me. "What, Riley? She's my roommate from college." "Why?" "Because she's been asking questions," Dominic said. "About you. About where you've been spending your evenings. About the flowers I sent to your work. About the car service that picks you up." My stomach dropped. "She's just concerned. I've been distant lately, and she noticed." "She's not just concerned," Dominic interrupted, pulling up an image on one of the monitors. It showed Riley at a coffee shop, sitting across from someone I didn't recognize. "She met with a federal agent yesterday. DEA, an agent who's been building a case against me for 2 years. The room spun around me. "No, Riley wouldn't. She doesn't know anything about you, about any of this." "Doesn't she?" Dominic's tone was cutting. "You've been disappearing 3 nights a week, coming home at unusual hours, receiving expensive gifts. A friend with even casual observational skills would notice the pattern." Marcus stepped forward, his expression sympathetic. "Ms. Winters, we pulled phone records. Your friend has been in contact with Agent Sarah Morrison for the past week, the same week you observed the Calabrese negotiation. Timing that couldn't be coincidental. The Calabrese meeting had involved discussions of shipping routes and percentage points that, if documented by federal investigators, could form the basis of a RICO case. I didn't tell Riley anything," I insisted, panic rising in my chest. "I swear, she doesn't know what I've been doing. I never mentioned your name, never discussed the assignments." "But she knows you're hiding something," Dominic said. "And people who care about their friends, who worry about them, sometimes do foolish things, like reaching out to authorities they think might help." The implications crashed over me. "You think Riley contacted the DEA because she's worried about me? That she thinks I'm in trouble?" "That's the charitable interpretation," Marcus said quietly. "The less charitable one is that she's been placed in your life deliberately. A plant to monitor you, to use your friendship to gather information." "That's insane," I said. But even as I spoke, doubt crept in. Riley had been persistent about our friendship, had insisted on maintaining contact after college despite my tendency to isolate, had always asked questions, shown interest in my life. No, that was paranoia talking. The world Dominic inhabited, where everyone was a potential threat, where trust was a liability. "I've known Riley for 6 years," I said firmly. "She's not a federal agent. She's not a plant. She's a friend who's worried because I've been lying to her about where I am and what I'm doing." Dominic studied me for a long moment. "Prove it." "How?" I asked. "How can I possibly prove someone's intentions?" "Call her," he said, gesturing to my phone. "On speaker. Ask her directly about the meeting with Agent Morrison." My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. This felt like a betrayal of Riley, of our friendship. But what choice did I have? If Dominic believed she was a threat, if he thought she'd compromised his security through me, I didn't want to think about what he might do. Riley answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cheerful. "Jade, finally." I was about to send a search party. "Hey, Riles," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" It's important. Of course. What's wrong? You sound weird. I took a breath, Dominic's dark eyes boring into me. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you been talking to anyone about me? About where I've been spending my time? Silence on the other end of the line. When Riley spoke again, her tone had shifted. Jade, what's going on? Are you in trouble? Just answer the question, please. Riley hesitated. Okay, yes. I talked to someone, but only because I'm worried about you. You've been acting strange, disappearing. I saw you get into that expensive car last week, and Jade, I'm scared you're mixed up in something dangerous. Who did you talk to? I pressed, even though I already knew. A woman approached me at the coffee shop, Riley admitted. She said she was investigating organized crime in the city, and that someone matching your description had been seen with people connected to illegal activities. She showed me photos, Jade, of you going into buildings owned by criminals, sitting in cars with known mob associates. And you believed her? I asked, hurt bleeding into my voice despite my efforts to stay neutral. What was I supposed to think? Riley's voice rose defensively. My best friend, who usually spends Friday nights reorganizing her bookshelves, suddenly has a secret life involving luxury cars and men in expensive suits? I thought maybe you were being coerced, or blackmailed, or... So you went to the FBI, I said flatly. DEA, Riley corrected. The woman, Agent Morrison. She said they could protect you, help you get out of whatever situation you'd gotten into. I gave her my number, told her I'd help however I could, if it meant keeping you safe. Tears pricked my eyes. Riley had betrayed me out of love, out of concern, because I'd been lying to her, keeping secrets, and she'd filled in the blanks with her own worst fears. I'm not in danger, I said quietly, and I'm not being coerced. But Riley, you need to stop talking to Agent Morrison. You need to block her number and forget everything she told you. Jade, what's really going on? Riley asked. Please, just tell me the truth. Let me help. I looked at Dominic, his expression unreadable. What could I say? That I'd developed a 3-year obsession with a crime boss? That I was now working for him, documenting his business dealings? That I was falling for him despite knowing exactly what he was? I can't explain right now, I said finally. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Riley's voice broke. Jade, I'm scared for you. I know, but I promise I'm okay. I'll call you soon and explain everything, but right now I need you to stop talking to Agent Morrison. Please. After a long pause, Riley agreed, though her voice was heavy with reluctance. I ended the call and set my phone down on the desk, my hands trembling. She was trying to protect me, I said to Dominic, not betray you. The distinction is academic, Dominic replied. She's compromised your security and mine. Agent Morrison now knows you have a connection to me. Knows you're aware enough of my activities to be worried about. That makes you a target for recruitment or pressure. What are you going to do? I asked, fear icing my veins. To Riley? Something flickered in Dominic's expression. Nothing. She's a civilian who made an understandable mistake out of concern for her friend. But you... He moved closer, his intensity overwhelming. You need to decide, Jade. Right now. Are you in this or not? Because there's no middle ground anymore. Agent Morrison will approach you eventually. When she does, you'll have to choose. Choose what? I whispered. Whether to cooperate with federal investigators or remain loyal to me. Dominic said bluntly. Whether the past 3 weeks have meant anything, or if they were just an extension of your fantasy. Whether you're brave enough to actually inhabit the reality you claim to want. I thought about my diary, still sitting on my bookshelf at home. 3 years of observations, of documented longing, of careful distance. I thought about the past 3 weeks, the dinners and conversations and stolen kisses, the sense of finally being seen, finally mattering to someone. And I thought about what loyalty to Dominic would mean. Complicity in activities that straddled legal boundaries. Potential criminal liability if everything fell apart. A life lived in shadows, always watching for threats, never entirely safe. If I choose you, I said slowly, what does that mean? Specifically? It means you're mine, Dominic said, the word carrying the same weight it had when he'd first used it. Under my protection, part of my world in every way that matters. It means when Agent Morrison approaches you, and she will, you decline to cooperate. It means trusting me to keep you safe from the consequences of that choice. And if things go wrong, if you're arrested or investigated or... I have lawyers who are very good at their jobs, he said. Contingency plans for every scenario. You'd be protected as best as possible. But I won't lie to you, Jade. There's always risk. Always the possibility that everything falls apart. I looked into his dark eyes, seeing the same intensity I'd cataloged from a distance for 3 years. But now I understood what that intensity meant. The weight of command, of responsibility, of maintaining an empire built on violence and control. I choose you, I said, the words emerging with surprising certainty. I choose this. Dominic's expression softened infinitesimally. You're sure? I've been circling you for 3 years, I said. I think I've always been sure, even when I pretended I wasn't. I just needed you to catch me. He kissed me then, fierce and claiming, his hands tangling in my hair. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. This isn't a fairy tale, Jade. There's no guaranteed happy ending. I know, I said, but at least it's real. At least I'm living instead of just observing. Marcus cleared his throat discreetly. Boss, we need to make decisions about Morrison. She'll escalate now that she knows the Winters connection. Dominic nodded, stepping back but keeping one hand at my waist. Put additional security on Jade. I want someone watching her apartment, her route to work, everywhere she goes, and run a full background on Morrison. Find out what she has, what she needs, what she wants. Already in progress, Marcus confirmed. Over the next hour, I listened as Dominic and Marcus strategized, mapping out responses to potential federal moves. I was a complication being managed, a variable being accounted for, a piece being positioned on a board I barely understood. But I was also being protected, valued, fought for. When the meeting finally ended and Dominic drove me home himself, a first, we sat in his car outside my building for a long moment. You can still change your mind, he said quietly. Walk away. I'd protect you regardless. I don't want to walk away, I said, meaning it. I want to understand everything. Want to be part of this. Want to matter to you the way you've mattered to me. You do matter, Dominic said, his hand cupping my face. More than is probably wise. More than I intended when this started. What did you intend? I asked. To satisfy my curiosity. To understand your obsession. To determine if you were a threat. His thumb traced my jawline. I didn't intend to fall for the broken bird. My breath caught. You're falling for me? Have fallen, he corrected. Past tense, somewhere between reading your diary and watching you take notes with that intense concentration you get. Somewhere between the first kiss and realizing you see me clearly and choose me anyway. I kissed him, putting 3 years of longing into it, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. Come upstairs, I whispered. Not yet, Dominic said, though I could see the desire in his eyes. When I take you to bed, Jade, it won't be in some cramped apartment with thin walls. It will be in my home, in my bed, with all night to show you exactly how much you matter. The promise sent heat through me. When? Soon, he said. After we've dealt with Morrison. After I'm sure you're safe. After you've had time to truly understand what you're committing to. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I already understood, but something in his expression stopped me. He was being careful with me, protective in a way that felt both frustrating and cherishing. Okay, I said. Soon. He walked me to my building's entrance, kissed me once more, and waited until I was inside before driving away. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my lips still tingling, my heart racing with a mixture of exhilaration and fear. Inside, my phone buzzed with a text from the work number. Sleep well, beautiful bird. Tomorrow, we begin preparing you properly. No more observer. Time to become participant. I fell asleep that night with the phone clutched to my chest, Dominic's words echoing in my mind. 3 years of watching from a distance, 3 weeks of cautious involvement. And now I was diving in completely. The broken bird had learned to fly. Now she was learning that sometimes the most beautiful cages were the ones you entered willingly, and sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones you loved despite their teeth. I'd spent 3 years documenting Dominic Valenti's life. Now I would spend the rest of mine living it alongside him. Consequences and complications and all. The fantasy had become reality. And I discovered that reality, with all its sharp edges and dangerous beauty, was infinitely more compelling than any story I'd ever cataloged in the quiet safety of my library.